It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. I've had some requests to talk about the recent news about Jack Greener and Francisco Iturralde. If you haven't heard the news, a few years ago there was a horrific, tragic accident at a jiu-jitsu school run by Mr. Iturralde. He was rolling, he's a black belt, very high-level black belt, very successful competition black belt. He was rolling with a white belt student named Jack Greener, I believe it was. And unfortunately, Mr. Greener was severely injured, had his neck broken. Now, when the story leaked fairly recently, because I guess the final judgment came out and Mr. Greener was awarded $49 million in damages, that's a significant sum of money. This raised a lot of questions and a lot of concerns in the jiu-jitsu community. But what really got everybody's attention was Rener Gracie's involvement in the court case and some of the things he said and so on. I'm not going to show you the footage. I'm simply going to describe what happened. You don't need to see a neck break. If you've seen this before, you don't need to see it again. No, it was not the dude cranking on his neck or doing anything crazy like that, like a lot of people on the internet assumed it was. In the court case, it was specifically said that Mr. Iturralde spiked his student on his head. That didn't happen. He was attempting a rolling back take. The Leo Viera rolling back take, which is a fairly common jiu-jitsu technique. Obviously, there is some inherent risk if you muck it up, as was demonstrated in this situation. But the case went to court. Rener Gracie was called in as an expert witness to testify, and he said some things that really turned people's opinion the wrong way about Mr. Gracie. Now, what I'm about to say is not a reflection at all about Mr. Greener, Jack Greener, the poor guy who had his neck snapped. Fortunately, as far as I've heard, he's started to make a recovery. He's able to walk again, albeit with some difficulty. And I'm glad to hear it. I hope he continues to recover and so on. Nobody should have to go through horrific accidents like that, and hopefully a discussion on the subject can help to reduce catastrophic injuries in jiu-jitsu and in martial arts in general. Now, on to some of the things that Rener Gracie said that ruffled some feathers. So let's look at some of the court transcripts here. So, I'm going to skip out some of the legalese here. Anyway, the Jiu-Jitsu Club, Del Mar Jiu-Jitsu Club, is directly liable for their conduct, I'm reading verbatim here, as their conduct increased the risks to plaintiff Jack Greener over and above those involved in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. This is what is said expressly. Is that true? We could debate that, but onward and outward. Specifically, the failure of the defendants at the Del Mar Jiu-Jitsu Club to adhere to the requisite standard of care by failing to have any type of written documentation, including failing to have a written curriculum or policies and procedures of any kind that would have allowed instructors to know which moves are permitted to be used and which rules are not permitted to be used. Let's stop right there mid-sentence, because this is quite interesting. He's being found negligent because he did not have a written syllabus of techniques expressly indicating this move is safe, this move is dangerous, you can do this, you can't do this. He didn't have a written syllabus of these techniques. How many of you at your martial arts club, at your jiu-jitsu gym, at your karate club, your boxing gym, etc., have a written syllabus given to the students expressly indicating this is what you can and can't do? This gave me some pause to think here. Especially this phrase right here, not up to industry standard. Industry standard. who set the industry standard for jiu-jitsu gyms? Apparently, in this case, it was Rener Gracie, and that's what's ruffling the feathers, man. That Rener Gracie, by virtue of being called in as the expert witness, has now appointed himself as the industry standard. That's a bit of a problem because everybody in the jiu-jitsu community does things way different than Rener does. Way different than Rener does. If industry standard is what Rener does, then essentially industry standard is having mail order jiu-jitsu courses. Yep, you heard me right. A lot of people don't know about the history of Gracie University Online, but Rener and his brother Hiran, way back in the day, had this idea, hey, let's do online courses and online belt certification. And initially what they advertised was online belt certification up to black belt. They changed that to up to brown belt. They changed that down to blue belt, then to technical blue belt, etc. Anyway, they set this standard of having people open up their own Gracie garages in their homes, in their basements, wherever, and training unsupervised by themselves at home via correspondence. They would buy these instructional videos from Rener and his brother, watch the videos, practice with their buddies at home, once again unsupervised. Is this the industry standard that we're talking about simply because they received some instructional videos from a dude who said this is safe and this isn't safe? If you put a bunch of white belts by themselves and say go, you're asking for catastrophic injuries. It gets worse. And here's why. Let's continue reading. Where did we leave off? Okay. So no written curriculum or policies or procedures of any kind that would have allowed instructors to know which moves are permitted to be used and which moves are not permitted to be used, nor did they keep track of the students by their age, belt level, or techniques they were taught or had learned. Okay. Not only do defendants, expert, and plaintiffs, expert, both have a written curriculum, he's talking about Rener Gracie here, and track the students' development, including techniques they have learned. But even Mr. Iturralde, since leaving Del Mar, utilizes a written curriculum for his beginner students. So essentially, since this court case happened, Mr. Iturralde felt the pressure to fall in line with Rener's industry standard. Okay, defendants at the Del Mar Jiu-Jitsu Club also failed to have separate classes. This is the crazy part. And it doesn't sound crazy to somebody who doesn't train in jiu-jitsu, but if you've trained in jiu-jitsu for a minute, you realize how insane this is. So the defendants failed to have separate classes for beginner students and advanced students. Well, that sounds like a fair, reasonable thing to do. If you don't train in jiu-jitsu, if you've never sparred before, if you've never sparred with a wild, crazy white belt before, you don't understand this. We continue. In his deposition, Iturralde was critical of this practice, testified that now at his studio he has separate classes for beginner students and advanced students to ensure that white belts are taught and trained with other white belts. Why? Because that's Rener's industry standard. So what's wrong with that? Why have the white belts train with the other white belts? Let me just finish reading this. Likewise, the respective experts, both of whom own and operate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu clubs, separate their classes to ensure that beginners receive the appropriate foundational training before being paired with higher-ranking belts. I'm going to put this out there. White belts are the most dangerous people at any jiu-jitsu school. Pairing new guys together is stupid, negligent, and dangerous. It is. White belts will attempt to murder you. They are a danger to themselves and others. They don't know any better. They think it's a fight to the death. Almost every single injury, ranging from getting scratched and bit and headbutt to catastrophic knee injuries, catastrophic neck and spinal injuries, etc., that I've seen in jiu-jitsu, period, have come from white belts. White belts. Specifically white belts fighting, not rolling with, but fighting other white belts because they don't know how to roll, they don't know how to keep it friendly. Like Rener says, they fight each other. They're maniacs. They're wild animals. So what Rener is saying right here, and this is his industry standard that he's trying to impose on the jiu-jitsu community as a whole, to have essentially not let white belts train with upper belts, which is patently absurd. It's stupid. You know who the safest guy to train with at your average jiu-jitsu school is? The black belt instructor, the highest ranking dude in the room. Why? Because he's an expert at taking care of you. He's an expert at controlling his body and controlling yours. He is an expert at putting you in a position where you need to tap out without leaving a mark on you. That's what a black belt should be. That's what an instructor should be as far as grappling goes. And this is true of any martial art. It should be true of any martial art. If it's not, you need to fix that. When I roll with a new student, when I roll with a white belt, I imagine I'm rolling with one of my small daughters. I imagine I'm rolling with a baby. And I need to take care of that baby. I need to teach that baby how martial arts works without leaving a mark on them, without injuring them, without breaking their joints, without traumatizing them in a way that is going to, one, prevent them from learning jiu-jitsu, prevent them from enjoying a quality of life that they want to enjoy, and also so they want to come back. Obviously, if you break your students, you're not going to get new ones. It's rough, man. It's rough. So it is absurd to me that Rener is arguing that white belts should only train with white belts. Do you not teach your own students, Rener? I'm curious about this. Do you, a high-level black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as you always remind us, who learned at the feet of Grandmaster Leo, your grandfather, do you not ever make physical contact with white belt students? And if so, why not? Why not? Do you think you're going to injure them because you have a black belt and they don't? It should be the opposite. You should be the guy in charge of that situation. As Rener pointed out in the court case, Mr. Iturralde possibly could have controlled the situation better. That's possible. I would chalk this up to a horrible unintentional accident. Maybe he's legally liable for it. I don't understand the legalese. But that's not what we're arguing. I'm not arguing about whether or not the injured party is, merits compensation for his injuries. Of course he does. Yeah, of course he does. That's why martial arts schools have insurance. That's why they're insured. Although, here's something I was wondering after I saw the $64 million settlement. I don't know of a single martial arts school in America that is insured above $1 million for a catastrophic injury. If you run a martial arts school, let me know if your insurance policy covers over $1 million of damages. Because I'm really curious where the other $63 million is coming from. Now, I did look at Rener's Instagram page, and he posted, actually his wife posted a little blurb saying, hey, the only reason this is becoming a hot button issue is because the jiu-jitsu school's insurance company refused to pay out. They refused to pay Mr. Greener compensation for his injuries. And if that's the case, then shame on the insurance company. But it turned into a witch hunt against the instructor himself rather than going after Mrs. Gracie, Rener's wife, pointed out was the culpable party, the insurance company. So essentially, what that argument comes down to is that the American medical industry sucks because there's no such thing as affordable health care in America. And this is true. There's not. I live in China. China is notoriously a communist country. Well, not really. It's run by the Communist Party, but it's an authoritarian country, although very, very capitalist in its approach to money, how things operate here. There's no such thing as social, the type of social goods you see in America, for example. There's no socialized education like there is in America. You got to pay to go to school, public school. You got to pay for that. There's no social medicine. Medicine is not socialized. It's not communistic medicine here. You've got to pay for medical care. The difference, though, China, like many other countries worldwide, has affordable health care. The prices are not hyperinflated to ridiculous amounts where you need $49 million to cover your medical expenses. Whereas in America, that's absolutely true. If you have catastrophic injuries and you require multiple surgeries and years of health care, yeah, Jack Greener might actually be losing money on this exchange. People are saying, oh, he's set for life. I don't know, man. I've spent some time in hospitals for much more minor things. Well, I shouldn't say minor because I almost died multiple times, but I didn't have nearly the number of surgeries and medical procedures that Jack Greener did, and it still cost me close to $1 million. Actually, quite a bit more. The first time cost me about $500,000. The subsequent times cost me about $500,000 each time. So $1.5 million for a few stays in the hospital. Now imagine if you required repeated surgeries on your neck and all this health care and rehab and et cetera, for many years. Yeah, man, I don't know, even with the $49 million settlement, if this is covering his actual medical expenses, because health care in America absolutely sucks as far as the price tag goes. Because, well, they're just evil, evil people in charge of money in the world today, and that sucks. But that's not the crux of what we're talking about here. So, white belts not being able to roll with each other is dumb. I said that backwards. White belts only being able to roll with each other is dumb. When I have a new student come into the gym, I always pair them up with a more advanced student, a guy who knows what he's doing, a guy that I know can take care of this guy, can handle his wild craziness without getting injured, and handle the guy with kid gloves to the point where he's not going to injure the new student. I will always spar with new students first myself. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-jitsu for about 20 years. That is specifically why when we spar, I'll spar with the new students first, so that I can see where they're at, so I can make sure that they're not going to injure anybody else in the class or injure themselves, so I can take care of them, so I can make sure they have a good time and everybody else does too, and we all go home safe. Is that industry standard? Not according to Rener Gracie. According to Rener Gracie, that's evil. That's evil and awful, and I should be paying people millions of dollars for pain and suffering or something. I was looking through the internet the other day on Instagram, just reading through some comments on somebody else's page, and somebody mentioned me. I thought, this is odd. Somebody's talking about me on this other dude's page. And this guy I'd never heard of before, didn't know his name, didn't recognize his face, claimed to be one of my former students. And he said, Ramsey Dewey tore my ACL when we sparred. And I was like, I have no idea who this dude is. I don't recognize his name. His face doesn't ring a bell. I've never seen him before. He's never stepped foot in my gym, and he's claiming that I tore his ACL. This is interesting. I did have a student who tore his ACL in class. It wasn't him. My friend Daniel Moraga. He had a previous ACL injury, and he came to my class one day after, I think it was like about 6 months of recovery. And we were rolling pretty light. He's in my half guard. I'm trying to just get on top, basically. Nothing crazy, but then his his ACL re-injures, snapping. And he's like, oh, dang it. And I felt bad about it. Did I feel personally responsible? No, I wasn't the guy who tore his ACL in the first place. But this wasn't the guy. That wasn't the incident. This had me worried, though, that just weirdos out there on the internet who recognize a name like, oh, Ramsey Dewey, he has a big YouTube following. Maybe I can get some money out of him by claiming I used to be one of his students and he tore my ACL. Let's go get him. People are talking about this court case potentially setting a precedent for students suing their instructors. And since the precedent here in the actual legal document is that there wasn't a written curriculum documenting this. Now, I don't have paperwork tracking exactly everything that happened in curriculums and all of this. And so it makes me wonder if this dude I don't know from Adam, who's never stepped foot in my gym, claiming, oh yeah, Ramsey tore my ACL, let's sue him. I wonder if something like this could lead to some future court case. I mean, could I just say, I don't know this guy? This didn't happen? I don't know. I don't understand legalese, but I wouldn't be surprised. If we got any lawyers out there, somebody explain that to me, because anyway, this was on film. This incident was filmed by the security camera at the gym, and so we saw what happened. We could clearly see the instructor was not attempting to damage his student. Francisco Iturralde, once again, is a high-level competitor. He uses the Leo Viera backtake expertly in competition. You could see like a whole highlight reel of him doing this in competition successfully. And Rener Gracie argued that this is not a move that any beginner should be doing. Well, if not, why isn't it banned for children in IBJJF tournaments? You know, the tournaments that have the most rules and the most safety precautions. This is legal for children to do in IBJJF. I've actually seen children do this in IBJJF competitions. It's not a super complex move. Again, if you muck it up and I believe, I mean, we could argue about the arm being trapped and he couldn't turn his head, and that's entirely possible. Again, I'm not going to review the video, and I'm not going to try to point fingers at the victim and say, oh, you should have done this. No, absolutely not, man. One thing this has made me think of is, what can we as instructors of martial arts do to minimize injuries during our training? And I started thinking of moves that I like to do. For example, the golf swing takedown. This one is I really like it. It looks cool, it feels cool, and it's safe. It's pretty safe to practice, because when you do it correctly, the guy just slides safely onto the floor. It's not a big high velocity impact boom where, you know, like a hip throw in judo, where if you don't break fall and tuck your chin and round your back and do everything just right, it's going to hurt you and possibly even knock you out. It's just, you slide safely to the floor. However, something about this move, and many moves, almost every move, when the person trying to, on the receiving end of the move, tries to fight it, and they get tense, and they spaz out, they end up injuring themselves. So with the golf swing takedown, when people tense up and try to fight it, this is the only time I've seen this move injure people. They thrash around, they put pressure on their knee, they fall on their faces instead of just sliding gently onto their back. So, what's the precedent here? Is the precedent, people keep throwing that word precedent around. What's the correct order of operations that we need to follow now? Tame new students so they so they can receive violence in a safe way? I guess that's the whole point of martial arts. When we tense up like a rock solid object, there's no wiggle room. There's no room to bend. It's like Aesop's fable of the tree and the reed, right? The reed, it's kind of rigid, but it'll bend when the storm comes and the wind blows. But the dead tree that has just complete rigidity and no flexibility, when the storm comes, it's going to break and fall over. And new students are like that dead tree who they can't move, they can't bend. There's no flexibility to their mindset, unfortunately. And so when you put two of these new students against each other, they're going to break each other. So I absolutely hate this legal brief that I just read to you. That, let me read this one more time, just this last part. That the defendant failed to have separate classes for beginner students and advanced students. That's not a problem. You should put them together so the new guys can learn from the advanced guys. So the new guys can train safely with the guys who know how to train safely. In his deposition, Iturralde was critical of this practice, and rightfully so. He should be. But he's been forced by Rener Gracie to adopt an unsafe practice. I'm going to put that out there. He's been forced to adopt the unsafe practice of having the wild white belts go at it with each other. You're going to see a lot more injuries if that becomes the official industry standard of jiu-jitsu or martial arts generally speaking. To ensure that white belt students are taught and train with other white belts. I hate that so much. I hate it so much. I hate it. I hate it. Not a good idea, Rener Gracie. Not a good idea. So Rener was critically panned for a very long time. Apparently he made a bunch of money, some like $125,000 by testifying as an expert witness, charged like $3,000 an hour for his time. And you could argue whether or not that's fair. I don't really care. But Rener, in a grandiose gesture, donated $100,000 of that money to a charity for neck and spinal trauma. And a lot of people are patting him on the back about that. Like, good job. And I mean, I guess that's okay, and we can't hate him for doing that. Bravo. But I'm not criticizing Rener for the money. You gotta make money. He's a businessman. He lives in a country with a screwed up healthcare system that will cost you millions of dollars if you get sick. You can't afford to be healthy in America unless you're ridiculously wealthy, man. It's rough. So I can't blame him for wanting to make money. What I can blame him for is this stupid ideology that the industry standard of jiu-jitsu is to have the newbies spar with each other. And you might say, well, no, according to Rener's official doctrine, the newbies don't even spar until blue belt level. How do you get a blue belt without sparring? Oh yeah. Online mail order blue belts. By having unsupervised noobs train themselves without any experts watching, supervising, correcting, etc. via correspondence, just watching some videos. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And it's a bigger problem that this is the guy who is setting the industry standard. I'm not happy about that. So, once again, I hope Jack Greener continues to recover. All the best to him. Again, any anger or rage I have is not directed toward the victim of this catastrophic injury. That's horrible. I hate it when people get injured in martial arts training. It does happen. It happens all the time. It will continue to happen. Martial arts is an inherently dangerous thing to do. Combat sports are inherently dangerous and may result in serious injury or even death. We have to accept that. Remember, like Miyamoto Musashi wrote, the code of the warrior is the resolute acceptance of death. All people die. All people die. Peasants, kings, noblemen, priests. But the code of the warrior, once again, is the resolute acceptance of death. Does that mean you should just simply brush it off if you get horribly injured in a jiu-jitsu class or your karate school? No, of course not. Once again, schools are insured for that reason, and you should be due compensation for injuries. That's why insurance exists. So, once again, Rener, at risk of circling back and making this video longer than it needs to be, if your real gripe is with the insurance companies, go after the insurance companies, not the individuals. This whole case has turned into a witch hunt and an ad hominem against Francisco Iturralde. Did he mess up? Yeah, we could say that. He did. The move resulted in the injury of his student. That's horrible. I'm sure he's gone through a living hell these last few years with this on his mind. And yeah, that sucks. I remember one day I was sparring with a student, and this student was a wild, crazy, spastic noob. And we were doing MMA sparring, very light, very technical. This was years ago. And he jumps on me. He just jumps on me and grabs me. And like almost like jumping guard. But he's grabbing my head and clawing at my neck, just like a crazy wild animal. And his weight in front of me forces me to drop down. He lands on his head. He's knocked out. I'm like, holy crap, did I just kill my student? Oh. And he came to moments later, just like 2 seconds later, but in those 2 seconds, it felt like a short eternity, and the amount of guilt and horror welling up like, oh my goodness. And it wasn't intentional. It was not intentional. He jumped on me. He did something crazy. He pulled me on top of him. He hit his head on the ground. But still, the amount of guilt and shame and horror that I was just racked with in those 2 seconds, man, it gave me so much pause to reevaluate the way I train, the way I spar, moves that I will do, moves that I won't do. And I would recommend, even though Rener is claiming the industry standard is to write all this stuff out, the moves that you will do and the moves that you won't do, maybe that's not the worst idea to write it out. Maybe that's not the worst idea. Rener's wrong about the white belts fighting each other and only fighting each other. And he won't call it fighting each other, but that's what white belts do. They don't know how not to fight. But maybe he's right about this part, that we should actually, as instructors, write out lists of things we will do and things we won't do. Now, there are a lot of things that are legal in competition, in MMA competition, in jiu-jitsu competition, etc., that are legal. You won't get penalized for them, but you shouldn't be doing those to your training partners. Think about, I love the suplex. The belly to back suplex. I don't suplex my students. That's why I have grappling dummies. I suplex the grappling dummies. It's a fantastic move. I love it. Looks great, feels great. It gives you this nice satisfying thud when you hit the mat. But if that was one of my students, these people I think of as brothers or even sons in many ways, these people, that would just horrify me to the core to do something like that to them. Even a punch to the face. When we spar with strikes, I always go very light. I always tell them no power, no power. With some very rare exceptions, when I'm training fighters for fights, we will sometimes put a little pepper on it, but under very specific circumstances. But yeah, I'm not going to slam my students. I'm not going to suplex them. I'm not going to crank on submissions, any submissions, not just a heel hook. Not just a neck crank, but any submission. I'm not going to crank on it. That's stupid. If I get an arm bar, I'm going to slowly descend, slowly drive the hips up. If I get the tap, great. If they're too stupid to tap, I'll let go and try for something else. If I go for the heel hook, I'll just hold the position for a moment and I'll let go. I don't even wait for them to tap. I don't care if they recognize that I win. No, it's not about winning. It's about sharing information and learning. This is very important for everybody to understand. That should be an industry standard, in my opinion. And how are we going to do that if we pair up complete noobs, white belts who don't know what the heck they're doing, with other white belts who don't know what the heck they're doing, instead of people who actually do have that level of control? A white belt might have watched a how to do a heel hook video on the internet. There are tens of thousands of them. I've made some. It's an inherently dangerous move, as are all submissions. It can tear up your ACL, can mess up your knee in some very bad ways. And the white belt doesn't know. I get the position, and they start cranking on it. It's what white belts do. They don't know how not to. And that happens all the time. Why? Because they watch Instagram, they watch those flippy-dippy jiu-jitsu videos, and they're paying attention. They're trying to learn. They're trying to absorb everything and learn as much as they can, as quick as they can. It is a mistake, a serious mistake, to try to set a legal precedent that this is the industry standard, to have white belts only train with white belts. Enough. Enough. It's a bad idea. Always was, always will be. White belts need guidance. They need instruction. They need someone who's gone on before, and they need that during a sparring session, especially during a sparring session. That's my rant. Tell me what you think in the comments down below. Stay safe out there. Don't spar like maniacs. Take care of your white belts. If you are a white belt, well, take care of yourself and those around you. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.